Hey, Kevin, what's going on, sir?
Hello. Uh, Happy Monday or whatever it is. Um, I was just thinking the music intro that is in Twitter Spaces, they it should be like it should fade out instead of an abrupt stop. Like it just kind of ruins the whole vibe of it. And then you could just like start talking over it as it fades out, and then you fade it. You know, Stuff they got to figure it out.
I couldn't agree more, although I hope they figure out some of the more important stuff before they go to the music. I think Twitter
No,
Spaces probably has a
no.
laundry list of things that
This
they
is
need
the
to fix.
most important thing. Come on, Elon. Get it together. You're never going to
Indeed,
make
Elon.
it in this world unless you fix, the spaces music.
Couldn't agree more. Kevin, before we get started, do you want to give us a quick background of yourself, your career trajectory, your origin story, and then how you ultimately ended up working in Web3 and for Tezos?
Yeah, yeah. And first of all, also just Tezos is a technology, not a company. So there's nobody working because that happens all the time. Every day, someone's asking about Team Tezos or anything like that. It's like there is no Team Tezos. It's like Team Bitcoin. It's not a thing. Just people who build in it, people who build on it. It's open source. It's a global technology project. It's one of the things I love about it. But yeah, my background, I've always done technology ventures and startup consulting, that kind of stuff. I went really, and just education wise, I did undergrad business and film. I did two bachelors at USC, and then I did an MBA at UCLA. But I really wanted to be a product manager, so I studied engineering in, well, that sounds bigger than it is. I did coding boot camps, right? So there's nothing wrong with that either. A lot of people, a lot of great developers get their start there, but that's not me. But it helped me learn sort of the language of engineering to be able to communicate better with devs and made me a better product manager. Then I did a lot of design classes, I think for like a year-ish through various UCLA Extension, boot camps, Art Center, things like that. So yeah, and so getting well-rounded in that regard, I moved into, and the first venture I ever did right out of college was a payment system, and that was before there was crypto, Bitcoin, anything. So I had very early exposure to the administrative hurdles that come with the traditional banking and payment system. A lot of these things have to do with security. They're not bad hurdles to have. It was just definitely very inefficient and not keeping up with the times. I think it's a lot better today, even though there are a lot of challenges. But yeah, so then going back into crypto, it was really Tezos that made me want to do this full time. I mean, I knew I wanted to do something in crypto blockchain, but I was thinking of a very kind of broad approach. It seemed to me that there were a lot of chains out and coming out, that it was a very early time to get behind any one chain wholeheartedly didn't make much sense, particularly because all this stuff is open source and you could fork blockchains, and that was happening left and right too. So it was very sort of a cannibalistic culture within, and it still kind of is within, well, in a general fork forward a blockchain space, but plenty of time to get into the nitty gritty of that. What I liked about Tezos was it figured out that, okay, we need decentralization. That's important. But we also need to make sure that we have a cohesion, that we're staying together, that you can that people can come in out of nowhere, contribute ideas, have a meritocracy where people can be exposed to that, vote on those ideas, build that up, and then it becomes sort of a globally connected, globally inputted wealth of knowledge that upgrades the chain, as opposed to what I was seeing with other blockchains, other L1 blockchains, which was, okay, there's somebody at the top who says, here's how the blockchain is going to change. And then they'll make what they consider the upgrade. They will fork the blockchain, like just saying, okay, everybody, all validators come and validate this way. If you don't like it, then you're free to stay on the old chain. No one will stay there, or you can go fork and make another chain too. You can do that. And to me, that didn't really feel democratized, even though people kept saying it was. It felt to me like, oh, that's like sectarianism. That's anarchy. Like ultimately, I mean, there's good in that. Don't get me wrong. There's good in the idea that if you don't like the way in which something goes, you're free to go and fork or take the open source and do whatever you want with it. But ultimately, uh, uh, like you get into such small shreds of groups of people who believe something or want to go a certain way that you don't have the benefit of that collective knowledge and collective contribution. Tezos is an actual commonwealth. It's the validators, the node operators who not only vote on chain, but they're the ones who actually contribute the proposals that lead to the upgrades. So when we see things like Tezos, blockchain evolve, designed to evolve, all that, yeah, I always feel like and that's kind of the official type of, if you go to like Tezos.com or the Tezos account, they'll probably say that. I think it's like it should be even more specific, like evolving, because it sounds like it's a general thing you'd say about a blockchain, but it's like no, it's very specific here. Like it's actually evolving with the times and and grows as a commonwealth and with collectivism. So that's that for me, the reason why I wanted to build on Tezos, I was thinking in terms of finance and DeFi before DeFi was a term, and how, okay, every technological shift starts with finance. I want to get really deep into that. But also, if you have this sort of fork forward culture and blockchains that have these forks, the other thing about that is the assets also fork. So like, we all know that, Ethereum Classic and stuff like that. But when you have a really contentious hard fork, the chain splits and so do the assets. So that makes it risky for financial institutions to get behind, not being able to ascertain where exactly their assets live, or do they have to honor both blockchains? And what generally tends to happen is you have a minority blockchain, and then eventually it gets enough validators, and then that becomes the majority that everyone follows. So to me, it's like, okay, but if you can avoid that and you just have an official succession of the blockchain, and you know exactly how it upgrades, and we know definitely on chain how the governance will grow and how the blockchain will change, then that's something you could say with certainty that yes, this is where the assets live. That's where they always live. So to me, that's why it doesn't mean that Tezos is the only chain you could ever do DeFi on, but to me, it's like, well, this means it's going to be a major tentpole. And even if you wanted to do stuff with assets on other chains and you wanted to wrap it and go somewhere, you'd probably start on Tezos for that reason. And then you'd wrap it and then go on another chain. But Tezos would always be that sort of base layer, that home. So that's why I decided to build DeFi stuff onto Tezos. And to wrap it up here, because I'm going lengthy, but the first thing we did was we made USD Tez, which is the first stablecoin on Tezos, and first USD stablecoin. And it was so early that there was not even an exchange. There was not even a Tezos DEX. So there was nothing you could even do with it. So we had launched it in May 2020, and it just kind of lay dormant for many, many months until Dexter, the first Tezos DEX, launched end of September. But yeah, and then we followed it up with ETH Tez, BTC Tez. We also made TezX, which was the first cross-chain swap bridge. So you could do atomic swaps between assets of different chains. And more recently, we launched TezFin, which is the first DeFi lending system like Compound or Aave that's on Tezos. It's undergoing security audit right now. So we're confident and encouraged by the early results of it. And after that, we feel we'll see not just for it, but for DeFi, and the overall Tezos economy, of course, will benefit because of what a major tentpole that lending is. The Compound and Aave, for example, are to Ethereum. We believe that TezFin will have that impact onto Tezos. So yeah.
Kev, a lot of layer ones blew up during the previous bull run, especially EVM compatible ones for obvious reasons. Why do you think it is that Tezos didn't see that same kind of growth as far as with respect to like a TVL and user activity metric that some of the other ecosystems, like apart from Ethereum, like even Polygon, Avalanche's C chain, even Phantom and Solana? I would love to know what was going on to kind of make you guys lag behind.
Well, in terms of user metrics, because I think those are different things. In terms of actual users and activity, Tezos has been amazingly strong. I mean, if you look at the growth rate, and this it went under the radar, I think, because of other metrics which didn't do well, didn't do as well, I think, relative to the explosion things we saw with Solana, for example. But like, so in terms of like the organic reach, the number of deployments, the number of transactions, the number of users and active users, those are so incredibly encouraging. And those fundamentals are so strong. And people who have a keen eye to that, I think they're seeing that as a signal for the future. It was just obscured, I think, by things like a Solana, because those chains, for one thing, you know, Tezos is much more about getting the technicals right and not about the spectacle of maybe the marketing campaigns. Like you saw maybe, what was it, that whole bidding war for Utes and DeGods, like these two different projects that were on Solana, like going over to Polygon. I don't know how it ended up turning out, but like, and what they got up to like 50 million or something. You would never, ever, ever see Tezos Foundation put like a bid out to get a project, like a particular project on the chain, let alone for that kind of money. So marketing in the immediate time is not very important to Tezos like ecosystem in that way. It's because, for one thing, because we don't have to worry about these forks and we have these official upgrades, we don't have to necessarily worry about getting quote unquote network effects early. Because for one thing, it's not the time for that. It's very early. We're not talking about anything that has more than, at the very best, the best applications have tens of thousands of users a day. Some might argue some have one or two have over 100,000 bots, but even then it's only like one or two apps. So it's such an early time that like, and to give you some perspective of that, like Google, if they have an application that has, I think this was a 2010 metric, if they had an application that had less than 100 million users, they would cut the app. Like it's just not worth it to them. So we are very early. But Tezos says core development has been focused on building scalability so that building up a network matters that much, which no blockchain has been able to do. Not yet, no L1 has been capable of doing that. We're headed towards a path of 1 million transactions per second. That's more of the kind of the later news from the Tezos core development. What you saw this is the other thing, I think, especially now, this is very relevant. If you look at the previous cycle, I'm talking about before the previous bull run, like you look at 2018, 2019 to early 2020, you saw a crypto winter and a lot of tumultuousness. But if you look at the day by day, Tezos was very uncorrelated with the rest of the market relative to other assets. And it because of its internal economics and how staking and baking works and people's internal competition to get more Tez, you saw a very slow but steady growth period. And then ultimately, before the bull run began in early 2020, Tezos was in the top 10. It took a very long time to get there, but it was very hard earned. And that's what made people very confident that, okay, this is a good value asset. And I think what you're going to see as we are in this consolidation period, I don't like to think of it as crypto winter. I think of it as a consolidation period for just in general for crypto, because we had massive growth. Now we need to consolidate it so that we're walking on solid ground, is that you'll see a lot of coins that, a lot of assets that, they're getting their comeuppance. They're going the way that where maybe their real value is, but you'll see Tezos start to build the steam a bit more and more and more. And I'm confident towards by the time we get to the end of this cycle, we'll see it in the top 10, maybe even higher, as people start to see the fundamentals and all that good stuff. But yeah, everything else is fantastic, which makes me more confident about it than ever. And I can isolate it as just it being obscured by the marketing, I think, of other L1s, which is totally fine. If they want to blow their money at too early of a time, go right ahead. And I think there's been something very redeeming about that, because there were people in the previous bull run who thought that like that kind of marketing mattered and that network effects mattered so much and things were just about to take off. And then now that we're in the quote unquote crypto winter, it's like, oh, I guess it didn't matter. Maybe that shouldn't have been spent. And even the relatively marginal amount on marketing Tezos Foundation had budgeted through that time, it just seems like even that's like, well, maybe that even shouldn't have happened. Like it would have been fine to stay at a more humble spot while we wait out that sort of small growth period and the current storm. So yeah, I'd say look at the fundamentals and focus on that. And um, people's opinions, I think, would be much more aligned, I think, with the Tezos enthusiastic crowd.
And so, looking at the fundamentals, and you brushed upon a lot of this earlier when we were doing the intro, is there anything to highlight with respect to Tezos's proof of stake consensus mechanism as something that would differ from Ethereum's or another popular POS protocol?
Yeah, there are a number of things. For one thing, in the way that Tezos is done, it's something called liquid proof of stake. So if you are staking your Tez, and this was especially novel when Tezos came out and did this since 2018, you delegate your Tez by basically assigning a baker, someone who would they're responsible for baking your Tez, but you don't actually fork anything over. It's just your wallet really designates that, okay, this baker is baking my Tez. I'll get rewards for this periodically. Like every few days there'll be rewards, but I can move my Tez in and out. I can spend it. I can send it somewhere else. I can bring more Tez in, and then that'll immediately start getting into the staking cycle and all of that. So we call this liquid proof of stake, which I think is a very important concept. If you wanted to be a baker, and which is what we call the node validators, the people that people delegate to, or the nodes that are delegated to, it's relatively light compared to many other L1s and staking L1s. So technologically, it's very efficient. You could technically do it on a Raspberry Pi, so it doesn't take very much. The capital requirements are relatively modest, so 6,000 Tez delegated is enough to get you baking rights, but you don't even need that much. You can have a small, tiny fraction of that, of just several hundred Tez, and then that would be enough for the quote unquote bond deposit, which is the only part that's locked up. And that's redeemable, of course. And then you can get the rest delegated to you. So it's very participatory. And it's encouraging of many from all over the world to participate, and especially those who maybe have been priced out or costed out of the market around the world. Like we have this project to get up more bakers in sub-Saharan Africa, which has definitely been a part that not only has it been so many areas in South America as well excluded from node validation, definitely from mining, given the expense and necessities, but even staking. I mean, it's very expensive to start staking for a lot of blockchains, but not Tezos, not relatively. But then it's not just about you're delegating to the network, you're staking to the network. The reward you get, there's this constant rate of inflation. And we hear inflation, it's a bad word, but here it's actually a good thing, the way it incorporates in the system, because there's a natural rate of inflation of Tez, the amount of Tez that grows per year. It's around 5%. But the amount that is actually awarded to the people who stake, it's an inverse relationship with the staking ratio. So if it's so say it's 5%, and then if say there's 20% under, like you only have 80% of people who are, or 80% of Tez being staked, then you would see 6% as the I have to get the exact numbers, but 6% would be the amount that you're rewarded per year. And in that way, you are very much encouraged to stake, even if others aren't staking. Like the less people stake, the more encouraged you are to stake. So it ultimately encourages a higher staking ratio. And if you're not staking, well, then that's definitely problematic. So what's great about it is that the people who are really active with the system are the ones who get awarded and thereby increase their voting power. So they govern the network that much more, to that much a greater degree. And surely that's the right place to put it. That's as far as we can see. So that's really strong. And particularly for a system like Tezos, in which it is the Tezos bakers, the node validators, that are the ones that contribute the proposals. They contribute the upgrades that govern the network. It's not coming from some dictator at the top. It's not coming from a company. It's not coming from some foundation that is basically a company but pretends to be a foundation. No, it's actually the Tezos bakers themselves and little old people who come up with this, and that's what I think is the best thing, because it gets from the collective intelligence of the world. Even if you have the smartest people on Earth building out your fork-based governance system and making and upgrading on that level, it's still ultimately going to be limited just by the sheer those individuals, and you're not encouraging and fostering an atmosphere of contribution, which Tezos is. So I think that's why we've seen us exceed other L1s, more prominent, relatively L1s in market cap in many ways. And also why I think you can see, even when certain features come later, that they're more optimized because of that collectivism.
So, Kevin, I was curious to know how Tezos approaches the blockchain trilemma, and also was specifically on that last note you made, curious to know if there's any way to go and see how decentralized the governance of the network is.
Yeah, you could go to tzkt.io, tzkt.io. That is, I guess, the main sort of block explorer. There's also tzstats.com. It's, the fact that I'm questioning the extension shows that it's not necessarily my go-to. Yeah, it's tzstats.com. And those are two of the most major block explorers on Tezos. You can see stats of the network and how it's grown over time. And you can see, especially on tzkt, if you go to the stats page, you can see active users, account growth, historically, all of that, deployments of dApps, active accounts, all of that. So that's really a thing to look at. And you can also see all the bakers. You can see all of that. And in terms of scalability, so definitely security comes, I'd say, first in Tezos. It's a very technical, very it's a blockchain that's very much the thinking man's blockchain. People who are decentralization security hawks, I feel, inhabit it so much more. And then even when it comes to the governance process itself, it's something that it's not just set by the way in which it was constructed, but even the governance process itself can be amended as times change, as inputs change, as concerns and requests evolve, as we learn from the blockchain and the previous governance processes. Proposals are made to even improve and democratize, decentralize that governance process. And just as a very linear example, I mentioned that it takes 6,000 Tez delegated for a baker to have baking rights. It used to be 10,000. It evolved to 8,000. Less than a year ago, it became 6,000. So definitely, I think we've, yes. And then also in terms of scaling, we are now in a process, and I think this is a very momentous time because we've done, I think it was 13 different upgrades at this point without having some contentious hard fork. And now the Mumbai upgrade is the latest one, which just passed the promotion period, of which is a little more in the weeds. But basically, now it's in the path to, in 2 more weeks, becoming the next upgrade of Tezos. And what's great about this is what it does for ZK rollups and the ability, the EVM connectivity. So for one thing, I think that's been a request from a lot of developers, especially those coming from EVM. So you can get like 80 to 90% of the same code of an EVM application could be used on Tezos after this. So that's very important. It definitely reduces a lot of friction. You can interoperate through a rollup and start to actually communicate between different chains, which is, I think, a very important thing as we go towards a more interoperable world. It hadn't been a concern at this point. Like I said, I mean, it's such an early time. Before we start talking about how do we get in the inputs from other chains, we need to get Tezos to be a very strong chain as it has been. And then I think the next stage after that, we'll start to also see layer 2s roll in, full-on networks, which can definitely take a lot of capacity. But I mean, TPS for Tezos has been ever increasing over time. I think now we're in over 1,000 capable of over 1,000 TPS, which is stronger than many of the other prominent L1s. Our block times have also reduced. They've gone down to 15 seconds. Used to be 30 seconds before less than a year ago, and then before that, I remember when it was like 2.5 minutes, but it kept reducing, and we'll get to a point where it'll be block times under a second. So definitely constantly building for scale, but in a slow, methodical process that moves up with the times. And I think in terms of usability, we're definitely not behind. I think people who need to use Tezos, and no one's really struggled with. We've never had outages. We've never had a system. I think outside of a few like just incidentals of like maybe a year and a half ago, with just some random event that would have such high demand that blew the servers out. It didn't change. It didn't interrupt the network at all, and we've been able to scale accordingly since then. So I feel it's that conservative but ambitious approach that's enabled us to scale with the time. So that's how we've addressed the trilemma. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I had a question about Mumbai. It's, as you mentioned, going to allow developers to build on Tezos. I guess it's like, I didn't understand the 80% EVM.
So yeah, like using WebAssembly scripting, smart contracts, which is a very common standard. That's and definitely other components as well. Basically, if you had Solidity app like on Ethereum, you have to basically start over and like rebuild everything on Tezos, just conceptually and everything and all together. But now we're at a point where it can use like a common framework of language, and then you could run an application for the most part on Tezos without having to do very much. So that's, I think, very good for developers. It's yeah, so it's something I think a lot of people are very excited about. I'm excited to see the first use cases of it. We have some ideas of what we want to do in terms of what EVM would bring to the table. But really, I mean, to me, I think the interoperability is going to come down to in the future. This is just in general. It's going to be more like layer twos that grapple more than one L1, and that's the kind of connectivity I think we'll start to see in the future, as opposed to, okay, here's an L1 and here are its layer twos that offload the weight, which is what we've seen because we had to see it, because like Ethereum could not facilitate that much traffic. So Polygon, for example, was just seen as, oh, well, you have to do it on Polygon. Like the weight is too much on Ethereum mainnet. But it's like, well, yeah, I mean, it alleviates that burden, but I think now we're going to get to the point where it's like, what are the benefits though? Even if it were all the same, what more can you do with the L2s? So all of this is basically just the tools that lead to the enablements, as opposed to the end user applications or the thing that leads to the end user applications that we want to see. Yeah, so I think the announcements that'll probably follow after Mumbai is implemented from different organizations that will start to illustrate it a lot better in terms of real world applications and what we'll see roll out over the course of 2023 and then beyond.
Mm-hmm. So as more layer twos, as more layer ones continue to get developed and spun up, and most of them seem to be general purpose, as far as I know, you need to start distinguishing, or you need to start differentiating yourselves. And I'm curious to know what sectors. I know you're big on DeFi and Tezos, but what sectors what sectors you see Tezos really kind of branching out as far as community growth and development?
Yeah, well, I mean, I see the L2s as the things that would start to get more specific and differentiating. Like we see things in DeFi now on, like Polygon, a general purpose layer 2, right? Like they're in everything, or the claims of the success of it are in anything. And yeah, great for that. But now you see like Arbitrum, and Arbitrum as having a very specific and set of advantages for DeFi, in that Polygon cannot facilitate in the same optimal way. Because you always have to make choices with the way in which you develop something. And some of those choices are more optimal for multi-purpose, and some of those choices are more optimal for specific. So as we get down tier with the layers, we'll start to see more and more specialization. But the L1s should be specific. I mean, non-specific. They should be all-purpose, general purpose. Otherwise, what's the point? There should be something underlying. So Tezos, for example, I think this goes back to the sort of the conservatism of marketing, and this is a very important example. In early 2021, say March 2021, and this is a time before you saw Polygon, Solana, NFTs. So Polygon didn't even launch yet at that point, and Solana had not done anything NFT wise. We didn't see that. The only really option you had was Ethereum for minting NFTs, and it was expensive as hell. Especially at the time, it was like hundreds of dollars to do any kind of transaction. Those who remember how expensive it was, and Tezos was capable of NFTs, but there was no central marketing from Tezos Foundation or anything like that. There was no big push. In fact, most people in the Tezos ecosystem, which again, there were no real dApps on Tezos. This was just people who really believed in the chain, and maybe they traded, maybe they were building on core or working on some other stuff like wallets or whatever. But if you ask them about NFTs, most people were like, they weren't necessarily hot on it. And people were still thinking like, is it a fad? Is it a whatever? This is before the big explosion. But then it was in March, a developer who wanted to build a marketplace on Solana, but it wasn't ready for it, discovered, Tezos is actually ready for this. It actually has all the tools for it. And so he sprung up a very minimalist, quick, using open source frameworks, minting site, and that was Ethereum. And within 6 weeks of that, there were more transactions and users on Ethereum than every Ethereum NFT marketplace combined. And then there was the whole story that came out. This is before, of course, the PFPs changed everything. That was before Bored Apes. But so if you were there at that period, that's what really definitely changed a lot. And that's sort of been succeeded by Taya and Object. And there are other NFT marketplaces on Tezos that have blown up like crazy. There's FX Hash, which last summer it exceeded Art Blocks for the largest generative marketplace. Then, so you go to tezos.art if you want to see all the different marketplaces. But the important point I'm trying to make of this is that like Tezos did not choose to go in this NFT route and have success in NFTs. NFTs chose Tezos. It was available by the technology. There was no central focus on this. Almost nobody in the ecosystem was developing on it. All it really took was one person really going to town on it, and totally independent, had no connection with anybody else in the ecosystem, and then took it to life. So it's really emblematic on how the technology enables something, but people need to build on it. And the approach of that which is quote unquote central to the project, whether officially or unofficially, those that are maybe the most influential voices or companies or a foundation, they don't, and maybe they shouldn't, try to position it loudly for a particular purpose, that developers can and should be attracted organically. And I feel the same is true in other sectors as well. We're seeing growth in Tezos gaming now, and definitely more a popularity amongst game developers and game infrastructure technologies, and definitely in DeFi. That I think that was something maybe that was asked about earlier with TVL. That is the one area where we're definitely much more undervalued from where the other metrics of Tezos are. If you look at STOs, we're number 2. If you look at NFTs, we're like number 2 or 3. If you want to look organically, if you want to look at fine art, we're number 2. But when it comes to gaming, we have there's the Ubisoft exclusive partnership and all of that, and plenty of other independent game outfits coming into Tezos. And in terms of business or just general use cases, by the California DMV is now going to move their system over to Tezos and build on Tezos. That was announced a few weeks ago. But why is DeFi still so small? Like you see billion, like $100 billion TVL of DeFi in general. It seems to be it's Tron and or Ethereum, Tron, Polygon, Solana, Avalanche that have like these over $1 billion TVL. But why is Tezos down there less than 100 million? Well, it's not, especially because I keep saying it's so great for DeFi. Tezos is like this perfect blockchain for DeFi. It's because we haven't had a complete DeFi ecosystem, like all the parts that enable it to scale, until around now. Like we didn't, even the protocol wasn't capable of facilitating dApps a year ago. To like a lending app, like a compound Aave, the protocol itself wasn't fully capable of it. We didn't have things like views. We didn't have things that like basic developer needs that to make it happen. But then after we did, and then the development had to happen. Now we have Tesfin under security audit. There's also Upana that's out there. Like so, as that starts to ferment over the next couple of months, you'll start to see the TVL start to scale with it. But yeah, so definitely I would say keep your eyes peeled for those things. And then after that, not only will DeFi scale, it doesn't live in a vacuum. DeFi will just grow the NFT economy that much more. And it will benefit the gaming economy. It'll benefit the STO economy. Everything gets affected by DeFi, and DeFi cannot have its tipping point in scale without a scaled pool-based lending system. So now that we're coming out with the scaled pool-based lending systems, you'll start to see everything else do better. But and lastly, that's a testament to how strong Tezos NFTs are, by the way. I mean, a lot of people thought that it couldn't sustain this level of growth, this level of volume, this level of user activity, of minting, of purchasing, and endure it, let alone endure itself through the crypto winter as it has, if you look at the numbers through 2022, without a scaled DeFi ecosystem within Tezos. Those voices were wrong. It has scaled without it. So just imagine where it will be with a scaled DeFi ecosystem. This is the first time that'll happen. The first time you'll see a scaled NFT ecosystem, then incoming a scaled DeFi ecosystem, and we can all watch in crypto, even if you don't care about Tezos. It'll be an interesting thing to watch to see how that changes the economics for and improves the economics for sites like Object and Versum and Tea and NFX Hash. So yeah, it'll be a very exciting year.
I'm glad you brought up the California DMV testing out the digitalization, I think, of car titles and title transfers. It was a piece of news that I found very exciting. It's kind of a paradigm shift within a very legacy, I guess, a legacy database, if you will. That's the best way I can describe it. But I would love to know why Tezos was chosen. Why do you think Tezos was chosen by the California DMV? And also, what does this implementation, what does this shift look like? How long is this rollout going to take? And then what does that mean for the California DMV's infrastructure? How is it going to make things a lot easier? Yeah, let's hear it in your words.
Yeah, well, we've seen a number of implementations of Tezos infrastructure and projects on that front in Western Europe, in France, and all of that. We've seen, I can't name the specifics at this point, but you can Google it. I think the French military used it, French banking. So using it for business systems, I think has been something that's been a growing track record for Tezos. I feel the security advantages of Tezos definitely, and security/governance advantages of Tezos make it conducive and for business systems as well, particularly government institutions. One of the things everyone likes about Bitcoin, even people who don't like Bitcoin and like something else, it's the fact that it's decentralized, that nobody owns it, that like Bitcoin will always be Bitcoin. Yeah, they'll have forks, but there is this sort of collectivism to it, as opposed to being a company. And I feel any government agency to resign itself towards something that's maybe controlled by a small faction, a company, or a specific individual that drives it forward, and something which can ultimately split and have asset splits, it makes it very problematic. So the fact that Tezos avoids that, just like with financial institutions, it's very attractive. The way in which Tezos is built, it is for one, it's in a language called OCaml. And this was criticized when Tezos was in its planning stages because people don't know this language. It's very obscure. Only a few French mathematicians know it, even though Jane Street Capital, Facebook Analytics, now Meta Analytics, Docker, and plenty of other institutions were using it. But because it lent itself so well for formal verification. So when you're dealing with anything that has to do with sensitive numbers, and you need them to be accurate and to be able to visualize how accurate they are, the inputs to the outputs cleanly, that's what OCaml is great for. And the criticism was, oh, you're not going to be able to onboard developers, and who's going to be able to build on this? It's like, well, there's a bridge languages that enable dApps to be built, so no one's coding their dApps in OCaml or the language that was built on it for smart contracts, Michelson. People are using SmartPy for Python if they want to do that. TypeScript. There's Taquito. There's LIGO. More of a sort of a Golang type language and syntax. So these bridge languages were able to be developed, and then that's how people are able to develop their dApps. So it's more developer friendly. Yet at the same time preserving this underlying architecture, which is very precise for business systems, finance, and a governance system which keeps the cohesion and continuity, certainty that government institutions need. So that's the general outlook. The specifics of the conversation of why the DMV made this decision, I don't know. I haven't talked to them yet. But it would be a good conversation to have. I think it's definitely the exciting thing here about this is it's a government institution, and so many people I know here, and I live in Los Angeles. People who live in California and maybe they know something about what I do, but not really. It's like you're going to be using Tezos whether you know it or not. If you're using the DMV, you're going to be using Tezos, and I like seeing stuff like this. And because it just shows the integration with the real world that which we never thought to integrate into crypto. A lot of people think of crypto as like, oh, it's this sort of fantasy world of whatever, and it's not official or this or that. It's like, look, your ID, your identification, your DMV ID, this is all happening through Tezos. So, like, I think it definitely says a lot of signaling psychologically and all of that. So that's a good thing. Yeah. So that's fun, right?
I think it's a great thing. I think a lot of people might have overlooked Tezos until that piece of news, get alone crypto. We've talked about a lot of Tezos' strengths, a lot of the exciting news coming out that's promoting its growth. And you also highlighted the fact that DeFi's TVL still has some catching up to do. There's a gap to close there. I think that with the DMV utilizing Tezos, we'll start to see a lot of other businesses and maybe even other government entities utilizing, if not Tezos, other blockchain solutions. But excuse me, I'm curious to know, on the flip side, what are some challenges or limitations that you believe Tezos currently faces?
Good question. I still think more bakers on the network. There are several hundred bakers, 400 something I have to look up. And these are the independent node operators that people delegate their Tez to. So 470-ish. We can get to a few thousand. I think people are just, it's still that slow growth approach, but and I think the education of people understanding Tezos is here, and you can get a baker going for relatively low effort and capital relative to other L1s. That awareness needs to come to be, and so I think a stronger, larger network. It's not just good in its own on a technical sense, but not that there's a technical struggle at this point, but it's definitely good for the governance and democratizing, decentralizing those voices even further. So I think that's really important. Making sure that people know the advantages also to delegating their Tez to a community baker, as opposed to what I think is a very the entry level approach, which is buying Tez on Coinbase, and then they say, okay, well, yeah, delegate your Tez here, we'll give you rewards. It's like, no, you're not actually delegating. You don't actually have your Tez. It's if you're on Coinbase, it's they have your Tez, and you have an account with them, and then they're delegating to themselves, and the reward you get, the amount of Tez you get, it's actually not a very good deal compared to if you sent Tez to a Tezos wallet, like an actual Tezos wallet, like a Galleon or Non or AirGap or Temple Wallet or Kukai and did I mention Non? Yeah, or Umami or others. They and choosing a community baker, you could go to like tezosnodes.com or tezos-nodes.com. You could go to tzkt.io and look up the bakers list, look at tzstats.com bakers list, and choosing a baker from there, you're much better off. So, and I think this is all participatory dynamics that matter so much. Yeah, it just generally it's awareness, I feel. And it comes back to no direct marketing, no inorganic growth that doesn't really help in the long run, which is a great thing. But the other end of that, there maybe the people who would be doing so much if they just knew that we exist and that we're out here, they'd come in a lot faster. That's the only difference. Do they need to come in that fast? Maybe not, but definitely, I think I talk to so many people in spaces and all of that, and they talk about their values and their struggles with whatever L1, and it's like, oh man, you are such a Tez head and you don't even know it because they don't know about Tezos. If they only knew, they would definitely be all about it, but they just didn't know. It just wasn't exposed to them. It wasn't their, or even their first entry into crypto. So I think that's the deal. So whether it's developers or just general holders, people in gaming, DeFi, NFTs, take a look. It's something's happening here, and it could be the answer to all the things you're concerned about on your chain right now. Yeah.
So is the barrier to entry to becoming a baker simply too high? Is that why there's only 400? What are the software?
No, I think it's just awareness. Very minimal. You could go to bakebuddy.xyz. This is a great site that was set up by some of the bakers in the community as well. And you could get the guide to doing it and how you can get a quick setup. And so bakebuddy.xyz, that's a site to go on. But yeah, very minimalist requirements. You could technically do it with a Raspberry Pi. So the simplest computing device you could imagine. And the web connection and with a few hundred Tez is all you need for a bond deposit. 6,000 Tez if you want to have a full role delegated, so you have a permanent baker. I just try not to get too much in the weeds and the specifics of what that means. But yeah, with 6,000 Tez, just want a reliable baker to have. It's relatively not that much. And then how much is it to run a full node on Ethereum? It's like what? 32 ETH. Yeah, so that's like how much money now? What's the price of ETH now?
I think it's the 32 ETH. There's a barrier to entry as far as tokens go, but it's also like running a node. You have to make sure that things online all the time. Like it can't go offline. Mm-hmm. I think the barrier to entry to running a node and participating in consensus is just like still kind of high for the average person. And having like the infrastructure to make sure your node's not going offline.
Yeah, and then there are cloud instances for that, which, of course, it's better. I think many will argue philosophically, and I think so too, to have it local. But sometimes people would need to, just because it's so much more decentralized that way. If everybody was running everything off of AWS, well, then if AWS pulls the plug on, then your network goes down. So we don't want that. But Google Cloud, they're adding a corporate baker. They just announced that for Tezos. And for years, people have been running it on AWS when they needed to. So there are a number of bakers that run there. But with Quokka project, which is something we're doing with Sub-Saharan Africa to get the first 10 permanent bakers out there, that is definitely the internet connectivity is a struggle. When there are missed blocks, it's because they need to have that constant internet access. And it's getting better. And, things like Starlink and all of that, definitely leapfrogging was a very big step for sub-Saharan Africa to get connected. But it's the continuous reliability and making sure these ISPs in sub-Saharan Africa don't limit their users, like for block them out for some numbers of hours of the day, or without having them, or even if they pay for the most premium accounts, sometimes that's a struggle too. So these are things that we're dealing with and I'm learning about just by understanding these different localities. But outside of the good news is, like, I think the hard part of making sure that there's something that can be run locally, the capital requirements of that, the resource requirements, that those are solved. And if Starlink can take care of the rest, or if just these other general ISPs improve, then I think we won't have any issues there. But yeah, but for other parts of the world, if you're in the North America, um, Europe, Far East, places where the highest concentration of nodes for any blockchain have been, um, you're fine. It should be easier than anything else to start running and get going. But yeah, check out bakebuddy.xyz. That's definitely a place to go and get started to learn about baking and how you can get going. You can get going pretty quickly if you follow those guides.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, undoubtedly, most of the TVL on chain is locked in EVM compatible chains, Ethereum being number one. What is the easiest way for folks that have their funds on Ethereum or other EVM compatible chains to bridge over to Tezos and participate in the growing DeFi ecosystem, for example?
Yeah, there are a number of ways. For us, what we created was, we did 3 stable coins thus far: USD Tez, ETH Tez, and BTC Tez. So I'll focus on maybe the first two. Well, for ETH Tez, I mean, you can take your ETH; it's backed by real ETH. You can mint that over to ETH Tez. Soon, you'll be able to make those ETH Tez purchases with a credit card through Wirt. Right now, you can do that with USD Tez. And USD Tez, I think this is pretty relevant for what happened over the last weekend. The way we constructed it is for through now has been to have a diversified reserve of other stablecoins, and the value of which we wanted to keep on multiple chains to diversify it further, but namely Ethereum thus far. And amongst those, across U.S. regulated reserve-backed coins, USDC, BUSD, USDP, which is Pax's coin, TUSD, and GUSD. Not including Tether, because doesn't meet our standards, not including altcoins, they don't meet our standards. But what was great about that, and especially in the very beginning when we designed it this way, is that if there was a depegging event and they happen for any of those underlying coins, the users wouldn't be affected by it in the way if they own that coin outright, because the reserve is diversified and therefore the risk is lowered. So it would be a small function, if that, of the depegging of one of those assets. But if the people believe that, oh, well, even if there's a bank run or people are redeeming their coins, then, but it's not going to get more than, say, 80%, well, then there should be no depegging at all, because by then, I mean, a lot of people feel this way too, that the recovery of the asset would happen first. So it's this diversification that makes things very strong. But at the same time, there is some level of, I wouldn't say interoperability, but cohesion with an external ecosystem, and giving value to the idea of this diversifies things, right? Because you still have something on chain. Yeah, but you can definitely, so you can bring your assets over. Tether, just not only to tote my own stablecoin, it also has a Tether, it also has a FA standard token. So Binance lets you send your Tether out in Tez, and you can send Tether or send your Tether out in a Tezos standard, and it can receive it in that manner as well. You could look at DeFi Llama under Tezos to see all the different Tezos DeFi dApps that are out there thus far, and things you can try out. So there's stuff like Uves, there's Calibri, there's Kipu Swap, there's Plenty DeFi, there's Spicy Swap and Matter. There's Cord.fi, Uh, oh, I hope I don't leave people out. But yeah, you could see them all. You could see them all there. And there's some routers as well, and aggregators. Like there's route3.io. So that's a routing system that aggregates the different chains. There's Crunchy.network, and you can see, and they've actually released an aggregator as well. So there are so many opportunities, and these will all scale tremendously. Vortex is another. I'd be upset if I didn't mention that one. But yeah, so, and you'll see new news come out on our front with Tezos and with Tezfin after Tezfin has its finally finishes its security audit, and we can start to bring in the scale. So it definitely is a time to get in and to look at it. This is where the opportunities are. It's not when everybody and their grandmother is raving about it. It's when you see the fundamentals that are absolutely strong, a DeFi ecosystem that it has all the elements around it, like it should be very large, but it's not, and it's maybe just missing one key element. Those, I mean, what could be a better entry point? What could be a better time to notice this is the right time to get in? Like you cannot set it up any better. Um, it's just that I think still a lot of people they need to hear it from somebody else first. But for those that are ahead of the curve, that's what I'd say to look into. And feel free to ask me any questions. I'm going to try to host DeFi spaces, Tezos DeFi spaces weekly at this point. I used to do that, but yeah, had to a lot of stuff came up. Can't just be on spaces all the time. I had to work. I had to build the stuff I keep talking about, right?
I hear you, man.
Back, yeah.
Kevin, I want to be cognizant and respectful of your time. Do you have a hard stop coming up soon?
No.
Okay, cool. So I get some
wonderful. Let's keep going.
Awesome, beautiful, man. Let me get some community members up here to ask some questions. I want to start out with Rahmat, and we can go down the line from there.
Yeah, thank you. No. Okay, so I came across an article stating that Nomadic Labs identified a vulnerability that could impact the Tezos network liveness but not its safety. This made me wonder if you have any monitoring system in place to detect vulnerabilities such as Certix Skynet. Additionally, I'm curious about how formal verification could have prevented this particular vulnerability from occurring.
Oh, I think what you're referring to is the upgrade that's coming in with Mumbai. And this happens occasionally where something has gone through, still that's not live on the ecosystem, by the way. So all the Tezos validators will upgrade to that after the 2 weeks, 2 weeks from now. So it's basically saying, oh, use this patched version, not the other one. So I think that the headline sounds far more exciting and dramatic than it actually is. Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Thank you for the clarification. Okay, I have also read about TZ Apex collaboration with educational partners in 2023 to develop computer science talent across Asia. So I'm curious if this program offers any scholarship and if you are actively hiring skilled individual as a part of this initiative.
Oh, that would be a great question for was it TZ APAC, the Asia Pacific? Yeah, definitely. You can write them. They're very responsive, and I think it's Theo Wayne who hosts with Non that hosts a weekly event with them. So yeah, definitely write them up. I think that would be an exciting opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay, final quick question. Tezos has had their SDKs added to the Unity store. So can you provide more details on this development and what tools is Tezos SDKs providing to help game developers to build game using Unity engine on your blockchain?
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. That's also a recent development. And yeah, Unity added an SDK for Tezos, with a couple other chains as well. So that's what's so great about this is that I think developers can start to see their ability to build on a blockchain is not limited by the tools that are available, but if the tools that they prefer would enable all these different chains that they could go on, well, then they can just choose the chain that they want. So we've had so many times when developers, they wanted to do something on Tezos, but that type of availability wasn't there for them. The tooling wasn't there. Oh, and in general, this to the previous question from that you asked me before, that I was asked earlier about something that one of the struggles. One of the things that is definitely being improved on this year is, I know from many core development teams, is the tooling, developer tooling in general for Tezos. So that relates to your question as well. But it's definitely being addressed. I know they've been surveying and canvassing. I think Tezos does have the second strongest developer tooling of any ecosystem, I believe, or of course EVM being the strongest, but that's still like a far cry away from all the stuff that's available on EVM. So despite it being a very strong developer interest, Bank of America had this report, I think it was back in 2021, the Tezos, or 2022, that Tezos had the second, 2022, Tezos had the strongest developer interest of any, the second strongest developer interest of any chain. But it was just the tooling that wasn't available. So I think the fact that that's coming out so much more, and also a nice kind of little invite tools that, like with the Unity SDK, I think that's definitely helping a lot. So yeah, we're gonna start to see a lot more activity. I'm I mentioned earlier the Tezos.art site, which is a resource for any, like if you want to do something with Tezos NFTs, you want to look at the marketplaces, the wallets, how to get set up, or if you're a developer and you want resources to developer tools, you can all see it at Tezos.art. That's something I set up like 2 years ago. There are no trackers or referral links or anything on that site. It's just a pure community resource. I'm also going to set one up for Tezos.game, so that the gaming developers can have their resources and people can get directed to different, like the Unity SDK, what's going on with Ubisoft, and plenty of things from just the Tezos core development teams that are gaming frameworks and resources that they can get started on. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome,
Yeah,
awesome. Thank you for your detailed answer. Thank you so much.
for
Over to
sure.
you, Noah.
Also, yeah. Also, I want to drop the name Blockborn. Look up Blockborn because, and they're on Twitter and everything. They are doing a lot of stuff with rewards infrastructure for game developers as well. So that's something that I think is going to be pretty prominent in the ecosystem too. And they've done stuff with Sutu and his recent game Circuit Breaker. Sutu, a very prominent artist on the Tezos ecosystem. So yeah, a lot more coming that way. Sure.
Sure, sure. We'll check them out. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sayed. Let's grab Captain Levi next. I think he might be having issues with this connection. Let's stop the Venice, and then we'll go to Captain Levi.
Okay, thanks, Noah. Okay, as you guys mentioned before about interoperability with different blockchains, that it will be coming in the future. So it got me thinking that how easy is it for Web2 businesses to shift their existing business models onto the Tezos blockchain and take advantage of its Web3 capabilities? And what resources and support are available to facilitate this transition?
Yeah, I think it's definitely becoming a lot easier and easier. I mean, even the fact that we've seen business systems like the California DMV take that approach, and like that, like the transition of legacy networks systems moving over to blockchain and Tezos, it's just becoming so much more fluid and quicker. I mean, something like that definitely surprised me. Like, wow, it's happening now. Awesome. But just even outside of Tezos, I mean, the other day I was on DocuSign and I noticed, which it's a Web2 thing, but like I noticed, like just looking at the web link and all of that, like, oh, it goes through Zilliqa, huh? All this stuff is on Zilliqa. I didn't even know that. So it's on a blockchain. So that type of integration, I think it's just happening so much that it's not even necessarily known by everybody, but people are just using this stuff without realizing that it's built more increasingly on blockchain infrastructure. So yeah, I think definitely with more tooling and definitely more of the enablements of universal standards that developers use, whether it's Web 2 or Web 3, I think that's going to assure that growth more and more. Yeah, and organically too, not what we saw, I think, in previous cycles, which was some big Fortune 100 company saying, we're going to do whatever in blockchain. And it was really just to placate their shareholders who they don't even know what blockchain is, but they're worried that they're falling behind on technology. So they needed their C-level people to make some kind of a broad announcement. No. Now we're going to actually see real use cases occur. And we're already starting to see it.
Okay, that's really great. And I was also wondering that with the Tezos 1 million TPS capability, it might be possible for non-crypto gaming companies to build their games on Tezos blockchain. So is there any plan to also reach out to those kind of companies to make them aware about how much Tezos is able to let them build their games on Tezos blockchain?
Yeah, and there's a partnership with or Ubisoft. Ubisoft, they're using Tezos exclusively for its Web3 infrastructure. I think that's huge because it's a very major part of the gaming industry. And that as a demo, if nothing else, I mean, I think it shows to a lot of small development agencies and just independent game developers that they can do this. That coupled with things like the Unity SDK and other developments coming out, it just makes it that much stronger. So I think definitely the initial Ubisoft, like a year ago, we saw them come out with something like with Quartz, but it wasn't done in the way that I think gamers. It wasn't done in the way that gamers appreciate integrations. It was done in a very kind of separate, siloed manner, like in a very NFT way, not in the way that gaming development should be integrated with Web3. But I think that that's definitely just part of the trial and error. I mean, this is new. Everyone's doing this for the first time. I do think, though, that gaming, when it comes to very hyper-rich atmospheres of transaction, I mean, if you things more than just simple transactions, but actual gameplay and all of that, it's more than just needing how many transactions per second. That's not really the major factor. Even the block times to get under a second, I don't think that's necessarily going to do the trick to get everything on gaming onboarded onto blockchain, any blockchain. It'll take things that like layer twos that are very specific to those environments and that level of sort of real-time environment integration. Yeah, we're seeing the definite roots of it come out now, and definitely the enablements that are being made by Mumbai will open that even further. But yeah, definitely, I'm really excited. Like I said, that 2023 will see a lot of changes in developer tooling in general. Yeah, and also 2023 we'll see the growth of DeFi on Tezos. But also, I think the things that like very exciting and make me very curious are just of like what we could see in terms of end output. It's just like the kinds of games we'll see on Tezos by the end of the year, because we've already seen so much growth on that front, and so much stuff in the works. But I think that that'll also just chart the trajectory for where it'll be in the next 2 to 3 years as well. So definitely look out for those. Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin, that's really awesome. And one last thing, I'm curious to know that are there any educational contents available, I mean, which can lead a student or a person step by step in a simpler form to let him build his project on Tezos? Because I have seen some students or some people trying to learn about blockchain, and they can't afford different tools that are available on the blockchain to build them their own project. So is there anything that is simpler enough that even a 10 years old can understand, even if he want to build his project on Tezos?
Yeah, if you go to Tezos.com and click on developers, there's a developers portal here, and it'll give you everything you need: resources, educational guide, how to write your first smart contract, and all the different resources for different frameworks and languages you'd want to code on. That would be a great place to start. Go to Tezos.com and then developers.
Okay, I'll surely check it out, and thank you so much for answering my questions.
For sure.
Thanks, Venice. Next up, we have Andy.
So what's up with Tez differentiators and compared to the market, the other chains? Like what can it do better or that others can't, looking at Ethereum, Polygon, Chia, Bitcoin, AVAX, whatever.
Yeah, so it definitely comes down more than anything else, I feel, to the on-chain governance mechanism. Not just because it's like a nicety, like it's good ethos uh, that the upgrades do not come from a single dictator or a company or a small group of individuals, but the fact that it actually comes from the community. It does a couple of things. For one thing, it doesn't we don't have any contentious hard forks, which means there are no chain splits, which means the assets don't split. So where the assets are, they're never going to be in question or a place of uncertainty, who actually owns them or on what chain they actually is the authoritative one. But also, it makes sure that the innovation, the ideas, the developers come from this very big and growing tent, that you can build what you want to build on Tezos for the core, for the actual development of the L1. You don't have to fork and make your own chain and have your own validator network to compete from the chain that you forked from. No, it's all of it is all those contentions and collaborations and everything, they all happen on chain. And Tezos attracts people who have that mindset as well, which is why we've been able to exceed other L1s in many ways technologically. Also, why we've been able to adapt many of the great aspects of other L1s into Tezos. So, for example, tickets, I believe, came from, I've heard recently, Libra Diem. We had Tender Bake, which came from the Tender Mint concept of Cosmos. So that was adapted from that. Z saplings, that came from Zcash. So we just keep going on this. And even the developers, the core developers that maybe they've had it with their whatever cabal runs their L1 that they came from, that diaspora comes over to Tezos as this melting pot of ideas, which makes it that much stronger. And I feel that's so important, the fact that we have this on-chain governance ecosystem, actual on-chain governance, not fork-based governance, because it leads to all the other advantages. Because an L1 can be superior for like the moment, but what means that it would have the staying power to endure and to continue that greatness? Or why can't somebody else just fork that in the code base and then make something slightly better? And then now that's the best L1. This is why, because Tezos has these official upgrades through this on-chain governance process. That's an actual digital commonwealth. That's what matters. The other fundamental things, I mean, the fact that it lends itself so well to formal verification, by being built in OCaml, and given the methodology and decisions, it lends itself very well to sensitive numbers. That makes it very strong. I mean, these things coupled together, I think, are very a great recipe, and we've seen the benefits of that come to be not just in governance but applications. As mentioned, we're seeing institutional trust come into Tezos more as California DMV is now going to be switching its systems over to Tezos as an underlying layer. We've seen the organic growth of the Tezos NFT ecosystem. We've seen that without any central push or anything, it became what's number two, number three. Even without a scale DeFi ecosystem, it has such a prominent NFT ecosystem. And that's just because the chain has been so ready for it that developers were attracted to it and they chose Tezos. So yeah, we're seeing all these benefits come to be, all these use cases come to be. That's because of the inherent benefits of the on-chain governance process and the definite scalable choices that were made early on and continue to be made for Tezos as an L1.
Are royalties protected on chain?
Well, that's a very specific, I think, to the marketplaces and how they choose to implement it, because ultimately, I mean, royalties is a very, very separate conversation. Definitely, there are royalty, like when you go to Object and other sites. I mean, you do see these, like, artists get their royalties. If someone wanted to subvert a royalty system, like we saw, I don't forget the name of that marketplace that popped up on Ethereum, that like the whole purpose of it was just to subvert royalties. But yeah, like you could do things like even if you had something written in the contract that would say, oh, okay, no transfer could be made, no sale can be made without this royalty being paid. It could be, you could trick the system and say, okay, well, I'm just sending it to myself. Or it's like, well, if it gets sent to a contract, then a royalty has to be paid. It's like, well, if it could be in a contract, and then you can change the contract owner address, and then that way you can give a so there are many ways. There are all these edge cases that you can use to get around royalties. In the end, it has to come down to these marketplaces, or otherwise imposing a strict standard to the or otherwise come to the strict standard at which any type of transfer at all must incur some kind of a royalty. And then it's like, well, who sets the royalty price and how that can be gamed? So a lot of questions on that end, but it's not a blockchain L1 question. It's more of a marketplace, yeah, and a token standard question.
I'll have to become more knowledgeable on the technical aspects, but my understanding is that some, like ETH, has been able to be subverted, as you put it, by marketplaces, but other chains are promising enforcement on chain, such as Chia is making such a claim. Yeah, so I think that if it is possible, I need to understand how better, but that to me is the future, because if something can be subverted, it will be, to save money, but it's very important for the NFT ecosystem. I think as a mechanism of prolonged growth is a very exciting and enabling force is protected royalties.
I feel like that's a slippery slope, though, right? If you give the people that control the chain that kind of power, you could go both ways. I don't know.
I don't understand how you mean that. What I'm saying is that if one mints something, one should be protected. If they set it at 0 or 1 or 5 or 10, that should always be the case. I don't understand what you mean by that is enabling power to the chain. I think it gives power to the minters. I don't understand your point. Could you explain?
I guess maybe I didn't understand your point. I was under the assumption that you're saying royalties aren't protected by the people. I guess royalties aren't protected by Ethereum. It's up to people who are governing the chain to step in and make sure that there are no bad actors or malice.
No, what I'm saying is that the smart contracts, I think that the future is protection at the minting level, at the chain level. I believe that's being accomplished now, is my understanding, but I think that is going to be necessary as a resolution to marketplaces subverting the royalties that were intended.
Oh, got it. Forgive me, I misunderstood your initial point. I got it now. Did you have any more questions, Andy?
So Tezos is POS, is that right?
Yeah. In fact, we call it liquid proof of stake because you don't need to lock up your funds in order to be staking, to delegate it. You just assign from your wallet, like where the Tez in the wallet would be, what Baker it would be staking to. And you can spend money from that wallet. You can move it in and out of different wallets. It's liquid. It's totally yours to do whatever you want. But yes, it is proof of stake. It's been running since Tezos launched in 2018. Yeah.
Nice. Do you have any concerns about sort of the arguments about centralization, a malicious actor unconcerned about price, perhaps with deep pockets being able to subvert the system, say, things of this nature? Is it the best decentralizing sort of form that you found?
I think that, it's the claims like that I saw coming from, I think, more the proof of work crowd. But honestly, those were the claims that were made against proof of just crypto in general. And like the response is very specific and well groomed when it comes to defending proof of work. But I think those same actors didn't really know how proof of stake necessarily operates. It is arguable it's even stronger security on that front with proof of stake because, think of it this way: if you have deep pockets but you have no attachment to Bitcoin at all, you could set up the greatest hash mining operation, have the most hash power and nodes set up around the world. You could become the strongest, most influential person in Bitcoin, but sell all the Bitcoin you get as soon as you get it. That's possible. I'm not saying that's the case, but it's possible. With proof of stake, you can't do that because you need to be staking the very coin that you have. Like, you can't sell it. You need to hold on to it, keep it staked, and your staking to the network is your power. That is your voting power. So you're more incentivized to want to keep it safe and secure if you care at all about its value. So even on a very selfish level, you'd want that to be the case, which is also why you also see the you got a little background noise there, Andy. I think
Sorry.
it's you might want to mute when it's sure. So a lot of people before Tezos launched, people thought, oh, if you have a system like that, you'll see the biggest, like all the exchanges are just going to run everything, and because they'll have the biggest bakers and all of that. Or like it'll just be those. It's like, well, we've seen actually the baking landscape diversify so much in power over time, but also what we noticed, especially early on, is those big institutional bakers, the corporate ones, the exchange ones, they very much felt the politics of their asset as anybody else did. They don't want to alienate the community at all. So what we see them is abstaining from voting in these types of in governance. They don't want to be seen as meddling in internal blockchain affairs at all. They just want to. They have a baker because they need to stake all that which is under their management, not anything else. So, and that's a very public record. If somebody sees them vote, it becomes obvious to the whole ecosystem immediately. So, yeah, we've seen that sort of inverse relationship. It's a very little consequence to the small pocket bakers, but a very high consequence to the largest ones. So that's why we've seen, it's been very balanced. There's something that carries over, I think, from blockchain in general, because there's a similar concept there, whether it's proof of stake or proof of work, because it's like, well, if you're part of this ecosystem and you don't want to corrupt the very thing that you have your assets in, or it's like you're better off being an honest node, just like you want to be an equitable node within the Commonwealth. So those politics lend themselves very well towards the decentralization and security of the chain.
Yeah, so I don't think any of these protocols are perfect. So I think it's just kind of picking, but I think we need to look at the future, and eventually we'll need chains that, are hitting better on the criterions that Vitalik outlined to judge a chain, which is scalability, decentralization, and security. I think that all of the chains presently have serious issues and vulnerabilities with all of them that like maxis won't admit, no matter what the chain is. I think that they're all vulnerable, have issues with decentralization and scaling and sustainability.
Right.
What I want to briefly, I want to make sure that, everyone, when they're judging these things, from this macro position, we have to look at malicious actors that have trillions of dollars at their disposal, like governments and coalitions they're in, or corporations like worldwide, whatever, like people who may have either bets on a certain chain or just bets on fiat as a monopoly and to continue. So I think that if they gather and maliciously attack a chain, eventually our chains must be resilient against a malicious actor with no incentive financially except deep pockets and to destroy the protocol, because that may, that is a threat that is ever present in this stuff.
Yeah, and even though I think that the security on Tezos is the strongest, of these L1s and the way it's governed and all of that, and ultimately everything is inherently flawed. If they weren't the case, you wouldn't have upgrades. People wouldn't do forks. These systems would never need to grow in advance. Of course they need to grow in advance. But what got me, and that's also why I wasn't able to really latch onto, before Tezos, I wasn't able to latch onto any kind of layer one, because I just felt that it's so early that we're developing and all these code bases are cannibalizing each other, and all of these things, besides all the hard forks going on, that what's the point of getting behind one system? It's because of the fact that this is a digital commonwealth, and no matter what position the blockchain is today, it can always upgrade, and we've had upgrades averaging every 3 to 4 months on Tezos, and we've just had the 13th one with Mumbai. That's the key thing, that if it's decentralized enough yet nimble enough that it can continually improve itself, that's the key thing. Continually decentralize and continually strengthen itself through upgrades. If that mechanism is not there, Or if it's only there led by an individual or a company, well, then you're going to have a bad time. Then we're just going to be going through the same cycle of finding some, cannibalization of L1s and contentious hard forks again, and we're never going to have a point where we settle on, okay, this is like a total final settlement. I mean, but like this is the thing, and we're just going to build on this and grow. Tezos is the first and only thing, certainly I found in all these years that's capable of that, and it's been working well.
Very good. And I think it's also cool to have multiple winners, which we will absolutely have.
Totally.
For different functions, and one will be more of a currency that's active, one more reserve perhaps, or whatever. I mean, obviously it's strong for the chain if it can do multiple things or make an attempt at all of them. But the nice thing about the almost certain reality of multiple winners in blockchain over the coming years and decades is that, to my point earlier, it's another reason to not attack a chain as a malicious actor, because if there's another one right there, well, we can't subvert cryptography and alternatives to fiat, because if we attack Bitcoin and it costs us $1 trillion, then that'd be worth it. But Ethereum and Tezos and all these other things that are making a bid, for our currency exist too. So I think that's going to be a reason.
Yeah, and if you look in terms of multiple chains, I think a good bellwether of this, if you look at DeFi and TVL, look at DeFi Llama or whatever, and they used to have a stack chart. I thought that was a very good way to illustrate it. But the amount of, like, if you looked at towards the beginning of the bull run, like early 2021 and all that, or you saw that Ethereum was dominating like 99% of DeFi, and now it's closer to like 50%. And so we've seen diversification increase, and it makes sense because in finance, anyone who has just even a basic finance understanding or economics background, the key is diversification. The more you diversify, you lower the risk because you're not pegging your risk towards any one all or nothing thing. So the underlying network, even if you have a bunch of different assets on a bunch of different platforms, but they all are effectively sourced or settled on this one underlying network, you're not really diversifying or anything. So I see financial institutions as well intentionally going towards and then putting assets in multiple chains, even if there's one that they like the best. I think Tezos definitely shines in that regard. That's why I do DeFi on Tezos. I've identified it as that. But that doesn't mean that there won't be diversification. There, of course, will be. So that's, and of course, that also makes for a better Tezos. I mean, as I mentioned, there were so many things that were adapted from other L1s that we were able to watch and learn from. So having a healthy and diverse ecosystem that enables growth and advancement that otherwise wouldn't be seen. So it's good that there is fork-based governance for L1s, that we get to see the innovation of that on other chains. But on Tezos, it's on-chain governance. And there's an official upgrade that's written on-chain by the validators, on-chain coming from the validators, that we can go forth as in a united ecosystem. So yes.
Have you looked at proof of space end time? Do you have a take on it?
Yeah, Chaya, that's their whole thing. A lot of things use that something proof of space-time kind of thing. People who like Doctor Who, that's literally what they chose from. They have that other, I think they call certain validators on the network Time Lords, actually, or at least they used to. Anyway, yeah. It's Chaya's great. I once tried to mine to see what it was about, and then they had an issue because I was using an M1. Anyway, but yeah. More L1s are nice. I think Chaya's coming up. It's definitely one I'm looking at too. But in terms of protocol and running assets on a blockchain, to me the most important thing is it has to have on-chain governance. Like that's where I believe digital assets should be issued. That's where provenance should live, on a chain that has on-chain governance. Otherwise, there's a very high risk when it comes to hard forks and
Can you
asset
define
splits.
briefly again? And can you say why Tezos is unique in
Sure,
this amongst the top, handful?
sure. So when it comes to something to other blockchains, the way in which it's governed is when the protocol, it's somebody says, let's upgrade this thing. Could be Vitalik, could be anybody at the top of that's considered the fountainhead or influencer of that chain. Could be a company or a foundation that's basically just a company, not really a foundation. They say, okay, here is the upgrade, and now I'm upgrading my node to this, and everybody, all the other validators should do the same. Okay, this is the way to go. And so those validators stop validating the original chain, and they start validating this fork, this chain that kind of splintered off and eventually became the dominant of that chain. And there's no forcing them to do this. They can keep validating the previous chain, but that network will continue to get smaller, and the incentive to do that becomes less. And also there could be rival upgrade paths. Maybe two co-founders disagree. This was the case also with Ethereum at one point. Cardano began as one massive hard fork of Ethereum before they said, okay, let's just make our own L1. Let's just kind of start over. But that was it. Hoskinson and Vitalik couldn't agree. So and just imagine how much talent Hoskinson took with him, and how much more advanced Ethereum would be today if that talent had not left. Definitely a lot of, I believe strongly, the ETH2 upgrades path would have been a lot quicker and a lot better if not for that. But having the diversification of inputs, I think, are very important. But it's not when the real thing here is when it comes to the assets. This is where it makes it very problematic for digital assets. If you were around back in the time when, or take any type of contentious hard fork, there were people I remember who said, okay, like there was the Bitcoin Cash split, and people who felt that Bitcoin Cash was the real Bitcoin. And that because it came from the people, whereas it's like, well, no, most of the mining power says to go on this chain. That was a contention. People couldn't agree. But what happened when this chain split is that there were two Bitcoins, like the coin, and you could go and you could basically facilitate both versions. If you had one Bitcoin, it was now you had one Bitcoin on one chain and one Bitcoin on the other Bitcoin chain. And there were a lot of people, who said, okay, well, I don't believe in this Bitcoin Cash thing, so let me sell all of that and buy more Bitcoin with it. And people did that. But then I saw the opposite happen too. People who sold, like, well, I don't think that this thing that's called Bitcoin anymore is the real Bitcoin. I think it's this Bitcoin Cash. I think eventually all validators will go over there. So let me sell all the Bitcoin and buy Bitcoin Cash. And I know people who did that too. And they saw the incentive of that, of the fact that Bitcoin Cash was cheaper. And it's like, oh, well, I'll basically be growing my Bitcoin. And there were a lot of instances of this. And Bitcoin Cash itself forked in multiple directions. And, there's Bitcoin SV. And, so so there was that. Same thing with Ethereum Classic. And this just keeps happening. And there are most hard forks are just very procedural. But then there are those contentious ones. But when you have a contentious hard fork like that, and then you have two versions of the assets, and they're not necessarily settled, the answer to like what's the real one doesn't happen. There are flippenings that occur, and that happened with the variants within Bitcoin Cash that came in the subsequent weeks. And people eventually offloaded the wrong choice, and they realized that too when between the SV and the ABC. So what if you are like an asset holder? Like, let's say you've tokenized a piece of land. And now suddenly that token, there's two versions of that. And like they're on different chains, and each chain saying they're the authoritative one and the other one is the false one. How do you litigate that? And definitely there's an incentive for an asset holder to sell, to basically split it apart and like have one chain. Okay, I'll sell to the highest bidder on this chain and I'll sell to the highest bidder on that chain. But they're both claiming to own the property. How do you litigate that? If you're maybe an asset-backed stablecoin, right? Like a USDC or a Tether, and then the chain splits and it's in contention. Let's say the developers and validators follow them, like the broad speaking of the community would say, let's go on this Ethereum A, and then you have Vitalik and maybe the foundation saying, no, go to this Ethereum B. It's like, well, one speaks more for like the consensus of the people, and that tends to be where things go. But the other seems to have a legacy authority on this. And then like, how do you like you can't, it's very difficult. And there are many indecisions like that that occur. And the larger something gets, that becomes much more probable too. Also, when it's proof of stake, it's a lot easier for that contention to persist much more than when it's proof of work, because proof of work has a very quick rallying effect. It's actually a huge monetary cost to validate a network, to take a chance on a network if you're doing proof of work mining. But if it's proof of stake, it's like, oh, well, I can just have this Nook computer. I'll validate both networks, whatever. I'm getting rewards on both. Fine. It's not a sacrifice to validate this network as well as the other one. Sure. And then you have just these very wide validator networks for multiple rival chains, and it's not settled right away. So how does Tether or USDC, which chain do they honor? If they honor both and they say we're going to be neutral in all of this, well, then that means, well, then they're going to owe 50 cents on the dollar to everybody who owns one of their tokens. But on Tezos, it's not like that. On Tezos, there's on-chain governance. So all contentions happen on-chain itself. And there's a process to this, like a validator, like an actual baker, they're the only ones who get to set up an upgrade proposal. And then people vote on which proposal they want to bring up and ratify. And then from there, there's another period in which the broad consensus needs to agree to pursue that proposed upgrade. And then there's a testing period, and then there's a promotion period in which there's a full ratification by the broad consensus of the network to say, yes, this is the way we'll go forward, and then, which is what we just completed. And then there's the adoption period where it's implemented. And the point is the upgrade is formally chosen by the validators through a supermajority of the quorum of validators. And therefore, we have this official upgrade that you can litigate and say, yeah, look at the block record. This was the upgrade. This is how it came to be. The validators voted on it. This is the blockchain protocol, and these are the assets that are on it. There's no question. But you can't do that at all in a fork-based system. So that's the defensive, I think, aspect, like how you get to protect yourself, the protective aspect of the assets, the fact that you don't have these asset splits because you don't have the chain splits, because you don't have to have any contentious hard forks. But then there's also so much more that's gained as well, because when you have this Commonwealth ecosystem where anybody can come in and participate and be a part of the governance, and they don't, without hard forking, you get the cohesion of ideas from all over. And that benefit is something else that's just so incalculable, because you could have the most brilliant, let's say Vitalik is the most brilliant person on earth, who's the greatest person of developing any evolving a blockchain protocol there is. Ultimately, he's limited by the fact that he's one person who's mortal. And even if a team were to do that, it's still ultimately limited by the team and their maximum output. But when you have the contributions of the many through this process and this type of collaboration that happens, you get to continually grow and gel with more and more voices from all over the world. And that's what also sets Tezos apart in terms of its future innovation and growth that will ultimately, and has in many ways, outpaced other L1s. So there's a strong protective aspect when it comes to the assets, and also just a very strong future benefit when it comes to the collaborative energies coming from everybody. And you only get that with Tezos, because only Tezos has on-chain governance.
What's stopping the world from understanding this great power of Tezos such that it's ranked under 50th?
Well, I think in general, all of crypto is pretty unknown. I mean, we don't really have many dApps, even on the strongest L1s that for market cap, but having more than a few tens of thousands of users at best. So we're not at a point where there's millions of users on any blockchain. But Tezos has grown tremendously through the bull run. It's the fundamentals that I think people should pay attention to: user growth and dApp deployments, daily active users, volume growth, all of that. All of those numbers are fantastic and have been growing continuously through all this time and enduring very strongly, unlike other ecosystems we've seen in their L1 in their crypto winter. But Tezos is doing very well in that regard. So there was, before the bull run began, Tezos, between 2018 to 2020, Tezos grew very slowly, but ultimately earned its place in the top 10 for market cap. So it's not that anything was lost. I mean, things have only grown in terms of fundamentals since then tremendously. It's that there is just sort of the obscureness that was created by, I think, the L1s that are very high marketing projects. Because we don't have to worry about contentious hard forks, we don't have to worry about quote unquote capturing network effects, especially right now when the ecosystem, all blockchain ecosystem is so incredibly small, that we don't blow like a ton of money on marketing in the way that others had. We're not going to pay money to bring in an NFT project over from another chain. The foundation's not going to do that. It's such a short-term kind of quick hit. But we've also seen the dramatic collapse, and everything went down, I think, in crypto winter. But in terms of like as a percentage, we've seen those very prominent seeming L1s collapse far more as a percentage than anything else. So it's much better to be built on solid ground by a network that's truly devoted to it. And even if that's a slow growth approach, like you're not going to see 100-to-1 growth within a couple months, then that's ultimately better, because the faster they climb, the faster they fall. It's the same in any economics, and it's no different. In fact, it's much more pronounced in crypto because we tend to see those collapses happen so much more efficiently than even in the stocks. So yeah.
What's the main NFT marketplace for Tezos?
Well, to see them all, you'd want to go to tezos.art, and the top you'll see all the marketplaces. The most popular one is objkt.com, objkt.com. That's more like the OpenSea for Tezos, but you'll also see FX Hash. FX Hash is like art blocks for Tezos, so it's for generative marketplaces, and they're doing a lot of really cool stuff with FX text and FX params. For developers, I think would be interested in more dynamic features that come from there as well. And also you can, they're a multi-chain, like, so there's a Rarible. You can go to Rarible, and they have Tezos integrated, so you can see stuff there. But there's also Versum and Taya. So check out tezos.art, and you'll see those marketplaces.
What's the approximate daily volume of Tez art?
Altogether, the aggregate of it, you can follow it on thestackreport.com. That'll show you. Of course, it changes all the time based on just, I think every marketplace does a lot. But where are we at now? I can check daily. You get a DApp radar as well, and that'll show you. But yeah, and the focus, I'd say, it's not the PFP art. Even though there are PFP projects on Tezos, Tezos does very well for fine art, and that's definitely what it tends to be associated with more than anything else. And that's why before the PFPs kicked in back in 2021, mid 2021, and you saw Tezos had more users and transactions than every Ethereum NFT marketplace combined. So it was really the growth of the PFPs that had Ethereum kind of have its next second wind. And if Ethereum NFTs have their second wind, it wasn't some kind of resurgence in the market that these Tezos marketplaces had already taken from them, because that's sustained. That sustained itself. Let's see. So where are we at? So object daily, was it 55,000? FX hash 88,000. This is for yesterday, so last 24
These are
hours.
dollars?
Yes. So yeah, the only other, and these are, so object's a top 10 marketplace. I'd say this is all without Tezos even having a scaled DeFi ecosystem. So it's been able to get to this point without having a scaled DeFi ecosystem. On Ethereum, they already had billions in, well over 10 billion TVL in DeFi. So they had a full like financial economic DApp ecosystem before the NFT wave kicked in. And so that lent itself, no pun intended, very condusively to the growth of their NFT volume. Whereas Tezos has like less than 100 million now. So it has and no lending system at all as scaled. So you got to wait like another month for TezFin to finish its security audit, and then that can scale, and then you'll start to see the true scaling of volume-wise on Tezos NFTs. But in terms of users and transactions and minting, it's up there like second to none.
Why would an artist or project choose Tezos?
So for all the reasons I outlined of why assets are better to issue on Tezos, because of all of that, that you can have confidence that it will sustain itself and not have indecision as to where the asset would actually live. There's that. Initially, what caused the massive growth of it back in early 2021, that's grown even since then, was the low gas fees. And the fact that you had to pay hundreds of dollars to, these were very super, I mean, it's not like other L1s can't adapt to this, but at the time this was the case. Low gas fees, so it was basically free to mint, so much that people were just giving each other Tez so they could get started, whereas at the same time it cost hundreds of dollars to mint on Ethereum. Yeah, that was all. And also at the time, Tezos was proof of stake, whereas Ethereum was proof of work. So the environmental advantage for definitely the artist community more than any other, it matters so much. There's a heightened consciousness of those things that within the art community. But then there's the consequences of those things of what has developed over the past couple of years, not just those initial entry points, but the community itself started to grow and crystallize around these sets of values. And the growth of that has definitely led to even more attracted other people who are interested in those types of community values, so on and so forth. So it's become something that's far exceeded even its initial value propositions, which were more economic than anything else. I think the fact of the governance that leads to all these other, it leads to all of that great growth in terms of community values and whatnot. It ultimately trickles into it, but it's not readily on the mind of artists, that aspect. I think it matters a lot, but in the background, but that's more for I guess people who are more ecosystem heavy and ecosystem conscious, or I'd say blockchain protocol itself kind of conscious, as opposed to coming in from an artist perspective. But it's a good to have for them. Okay.
What's the foundation or the top of Tez, the community, whatever, doing let me finish this to court artists, like new artists, or give them grants or promote projects and such?
Well, as I explained, there is no top of Tezos, because Tezos is this decentralized blockchain ecosystem that's run by its community of bakers, validators. And even the development of Tezos's NFT ecosystem, the art ecosystem, was extremely organic. There was no Tezos did not choose to go through this NFT route. NFT chose Tezos. It was really one lone developer who decided in March 2021 to create this very minimalist, basic, using open source frameworks marketplace that in 6 weeks became had more users and transactions than every Ethereum marketplace, NFT marketplace combined. And what followed through was maybe more attention from what we saw towards NFTs by the rest of the ecosystem, but it didn't start from that, and it wasn't sourced in that. It was all organic. And definitely even the culture of Tezos is very much respective of that. Like you go around, you notice people who they're like that. They don't like to be marketed to. They like to find things on their own. They like to hear of things, or just by noticing the art or their favorite artists do it, and it makes it that much stronger. Whereas they've noticed, and then those same people, when they see something marketed or incentivized for people to come in, it backfires. So that's the type of genuinity. We just saw Pussy Riot and Shepard Fairey do a drop, Putin's Ashes, and that was like the first open edition on Object. That's like it was a very, I think, street cred, for lack of a better term, type of drop that came in, and to me it speaks so well. It's not the only thing like that, but uh, you see so much of this sort of punk rock vibe of people who are just very much rejecting of the commercial, intentionally incentivized culture, and people who just want to make and create and be around other people who are creators. And that's whereas before the NFT culture came to be, it maybe obscured Tezos, that type of vibe, obscured it from maybe traders and people who went into DeFi stuff who very much needed things like yield farms and all of that to get in the door. Maybe that's still the case for these massive decentralized and massively subsidized programs. But when it came to art, well, that fit perfectly because it's like, oh, you're not trying to court us or get us in. I like that. And that's what stuck. So, yeah, plenty of
Yeah,
artists I see in this room that I've met over the years. They came from that as well. There are plenty of Tezos artists here.
I was enjoying that object marketplace before the weird shutdown or whatever. That wasn't what stopped me.
Oh,
I just happened to fade out of
that's.
it. But
I think
yeah, no, that was,
you're
yeah,
thinking of a different marketplace. You're thinking of Ikitnunk, but
right, correct,
Ikitnunk didn't. Yeah, Ikitnunk didn't ever shut down the front end. Really, it was
right,
just the front end
right,
website. The
right.
dot for people who don't know, the dot XYZ. The initial creator, he was still in college and he wanted to just go back and do his finals. That's basically it. But the thing about any Web3 and these decentralized open source smart contracts and everything is the contract itself was able to be instantly, the same day, instantiated and used by a new front end. And it just became economic.art, and it was the same exact website. Um, a lot of people didn't know that, but most users did return. Like, so the retention was well over 50%. And then a community developed around that, and then that became Tea. So Tea.art is really the spiritual succession of Ikitnook in that regard, because the community of people behind it rallied together to create a DAO, and it looks and feels the same even as the old Ikitnook. And yeah, but also that contract itself is not just aggregated by them, but also by object, and you can do all that stuff on. You can do it on object, and then as well as other mirrors of Economic that are out there. So yeah, it's definitely. I think it's a great success story for just general, even if people who don't care about any of this stuff, even if you don't care about art or NFTs or Tezos or any of these blockchains, it's a great testament to the power of Web3 that the initial creator could just up and leave and take down the front end site, but the ecosystem that was created, the smart contract in which it lives on, and that anybody else can just pick up the reins and make a new front end. That's why you can't really, and that's also why when it comes to things like regulatory approvals of certain aspects, whatever, it's not even necessarily NFTs, but like, oh, what if the government shuts down whatever? It's like, well, they can't shut down a smart contract. It's impossible. It lives on the blockchain. You could, if someone runs a front end website, somebody else could make a front end website anywhere else in the world. You could raid those offices or order them to shut down, or you could kill that website. Kind of like file sharing websites. People would shut them down, but then another mirror would pop up somewhere. Like back in the day, still the case today. It ultimately you can't really stop it. So it goes to show the power of Web3.
Yeah, that's definitely super important and some good points. I was just saying, yeah, I mean, like I was saying, I enjoyed the marketplace. I think a lot of people really found that was one of the only sources and that I've seen, period, for a high signal to noise, like in an art market. And just, it's a lot to be learned also, just from it being fun and cheap, and people feel like, they could get in and support artists cheaply. So, small transfer costs plus just the prices for whatever reason, a lot of cool stuff for like $2 and stuff. And people really enjoyed that, and it got them into it. And then of course there's some degree of a higher end market. But overall, I think all chains are really dropping the ball on a great opportunity for themselves and for humanity, which is the promise of supporting international unknown artists you know, and giving them a place. So I think the marketplaces can cross promote and do more things, you know, to amplify more than just a few headliners. And I think that marketplaces, chains should really invest in getting artists who aren't on blockchain at all, as well as within the ecosystem, to participate more. Yeah.
Yep. And yeah, when Eget Nunc came out, like in early March 2021, that was like it was the economic factors that enabled it, not any kind of central push. But what people clung onto was the fact that like they could not just mint for that cheaply, but they could actually go and buy these NFTs, like a lot of them, because of the fact that gas was not this crazy amount, and like gas was basically free, artists could price their works at whatever they wanted. They didn't have to account for like $100 gas fee, and which meant that so much of their work could be so much more accessible by so many, which meant that more people could buy it, and then that meant that their portfolios or their of NFTs would have their NFT in it, and then they would get discovered more, and then they could build a community around it. And if you went to like an NFT, the Spaces wasn't around then; it was Clubhouse. So if you went to a Clubhouse room, and you know, you'd see all these artists and collectors, you'd see hundreds of people there, like a space like this, and people talking. It was mostly just, it felt like group therapy about gas fees. That's what it was like when it was just Ethereum NFTs. Just because people were like and many people who wanted to participate, who wanted to mint, but they couldn't, because like they couldn't even, like they were just still trying to work up the nerve to do their first experimental mint because of the friction of having to pay even like 20, 50, $100 to get going. But so Tezos comes around, it's like, well, you could basically do it for free. Here, it's so small that I'm giving you the test so you can get started. And then they could just start minting, experimenting left and right. And not only that, but buy up a bunch for the same amount of money. And then like they suddenly had all these new friends in the ecosystem, and then that encouraged them to make more. And then more people came in because they wanted to participate, and like it made it fun. Whereas it was such a, when gas fees are high, like it was in Ethereum, it becomes such a stressful event to make a transaction. Even if you can afford it, even if you already decided you're going to do it, it's still like, you got to part with this money just for the gas, and it sucks. But that was just immediately gone. So that was a big thing. And again, because it was so organically sourced, and because it was so people still just kind of onboarding, we had all the people in the door. The price points were rising slowly, and also no DeFi ecosystem was in place. So like again, it had to rise slowly. It couldn't be just someone can collateralize their assets and then borrow some money and make some major splurge of a purchase. But that's also what made it so, like the growth of the price point so strong, because it was real. It was so natural, and it was coming from the many, not from just a couple people coming in to do it. But then you started to see like, and what you see now, it, which was like very regularly, you have very high ticket items being sold. A year ago, it was not even like what you'd see, like the top 10 sales per day. It's like, yeah, take away a zero from the end. Like that was like the top 10 purchases of the day. But yeah, so that growth has just been phenomenal. And we're gonna keep seeing it. And I just can't even imagine where it's going to be after DeFi starts to scale, because in a sense, it hasn't even started yet, as strong as it is. So I'm very excited for that.
Hey, Andy, I really appreciate you coming on and throwing some great questions. Kevin, obviously, really appreciate you coming on here for 2 hours and dropping knowledge on us. Learned a lot about Tezos, and I'm looking forward to seeing where you guys take this ecosystem. If you have any closing thoughts to share with the community, go ahead and do so now. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap things up. I have another space coming up in an hour. I need to go for a run.
For sure, yeah. I got to go get lunch. Yeah, and if you like any of the things I had to say, or you want to ask more questions, feel free to follow me. I'm going to try to host a DeFi space weekly starting this week. So you can follow me for that and look for that link. And also any of the projects that I mentioned, you can check out my bio. That'll be a good link to these DeFi projects that are going on that we initiated through Whalechain and StableTech.
Thank you again, Kevin. Whale Coin Talk community, that was the third space of the day on the aquarium. Remember that everything you hear on this broadcast is meant for educational purposes only. Nothing is financial advice. So be safe out there, and we'll see you all in an hour for Fireside Chat with Papa Stocks. Take care.
Thanks so much. This was wonderful. Let's do it again.
Would love to.